Good evening, colleagues. It is Ilse Tutor here. It is 6:30, and I think we're going to start on time tonight because we have two speakers tonight. So, colleagues, I want to say to you a very warm welcome to our first SAAHE Eastern Cape Chapter webinar for 2025. We are privileged this evening to have two speakers. We have our president, Professor Elise Archer, joining us tonight. She's going to address us. And then we have Dr. Madeleine Muller from Walter Sisulu University, who is going to talk to us about transforming toxic learning environments. So very welcome to this evening session. And I'm going to move on to the next slide and just recap very briefly. In 2024, we hosted 4 webinars, workplace-based assessment that was also presented by Dr. Muller, use of game-based learning. Then it was followed by state of interprofessional education, and we ended the year with the ethical implications of AI for health professions education. If you missed any of these sessions, you can watch them on the website, on the SAAHE website. They have been uploaded, except the last one is in the process of being uploaded. So you are very welcome to watch them. We are very proud that we could have hosted the 4 of them. So this year we're following with another 4. Before I go further, I want to ask, are all of you SAAHE members? If not, please register for SAAHE. It is only 400 Rand per annum. Or alternatively, attend the upcoming SAAHE conference that is held in Bloemfontein. And then your registration fee for SAAHE for the year will be covered by the registration fee. And while I'm saying this, I have to alert you to the abstract closing date is the 18th of March. So you've got a few days, or must I rather say a few hours, a week, to still submit an abstract. If any of you are interested to attend, remember the conference registration fee includes also your SAAHE membership fee for the year. So we encourage you to please become active in SAAHE. And then tonight, first webinar of 2025, the toxic learning environments. But before we start with that, I want to hand over to our SAAHE president, Professor Elise Archer, who has joined us tonight. Elise, I'm not going to read your bio sketch. It is on the SAAHE website. We are looking forward to hear you, and it is good to see you. Very welcome to the Eastern Cape. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilse. If you can't hear me, please indicate, because sometimes this computer of mine gives me a bit of sound problems. I haven't got any PowerPoint this evening. I'm really just want to say a couple of words. So firstly, Ilse, to you and the team, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your session this evening. Unfortunately, I can't stay for the whole one, but I definitely want to say welcome to everyone. There's a special place in my heart for the Eastern Cape. I come from the Eastern Cape as well. I was born in a little town called Dordrecht. So I can speak isiXhosa. I love the Eastern Cape. And I also studied in Bloemfontein initially, and only then came to the Western Cape. So I am a nurse by background, and since then went on to do other courses. But now, at the moment, I would say I rather see myself as an educator. I haven't been in the clinical area as a nurse for a long time, but and my PhD was in health professions education and in patient-centeredness. To me, the field of health professions education is really a wonderful field. I think this is the place where so many things come together. And if I just think about my journey as a nurse educator and then becoming a lecturer at the university, the field where all people could work together was really something I didn't know of before I came to know of health professions education. It's really a place, and I'm sure those of you that's new to the field and those of you that's long in the field, this is really a place where we grow together, where I have not ever found anybody that will be critical and belittle somebody else, but it's really a space where we all want students to learn better, whether it is a nursing student, a medical student, a pharmacy student, a student is a student, and we can all learn from each other. But enough from my personal journey. I really want to congratulate the Eastern Cape for what you've managed to achieve. I mean, Ilse and team, when you finished your conference 2 years ago, there wasn't much going on in your region, and in a short time, you've managed to pull together a kind of inactive chapter to, I must be very honest, if not, then almost the second most active region. Sorry for using the word region. We tend to talk about chapter in the SAAHE group. So I really want to congratulate you. You can feel very proud of yourself. And even now, when I look at those topics you had last year and the fact that you make it available to your members online, those are really things I want to commend you for. And then for all of you who are attending tonight, these type of faculty development sessions are very, very important. Just as you as a nurse or a dentist or a pharmacist, do make sure that you stay scientifically evident and that you know in your field what are the evidence-based things one should do. It is right that you also build on your teacher or educator knowledge. So kudos to you for attending this. I hope you will still attend many more. And your own chapter provides some things to you, but I also want to remind you that in the bigger SAAHE, there are various chapters, and some of the chapters do make their sessions available from time to time, just as yourselves. Thanks, Ilse and team, for sending out this invite to other people. So maybe at this stage, is there a way that I can get a sense of the people in the room? Are all the people from the Eastern Cape, or with the advertisement to the rest of SAAHE, have we got people from other chapters also attending? Can you maybe put up your hand if you're from another chapter? Ilse, I don't know, can you see the hands in the screen? I can only see a few. Oh, there's Danelle, yes. Okay, she's from the Western Cape. Nice. Other people from there's another thumbs up. Gauteng. Nice. Free State. KwaZulu-Natal. Another one from Western Cape. Well, this is wonderful. You can keep on posting. I'm so glad for the Eastern Cape making this available, and knowing Madeleine and the work that she's doing, I am sure that you will not regret for attending this evening.
Elise, you're muted. Elise, you're muted.
Okay, is it better now?
Yeah, now we can hear you again.
Okay. So I also just want to advertise the conference, but Ilse showed you that advertisement. Please see if you can go to the conference. It is usually a lovely conference to attend, and those of you that cannot make this year, you can already put it in your diaries. Next year it's going to be in Cape Town, in the Western Cape. So I think for me, when I think about health professions education, I realize how many things changed over the last decades. And there were a lot of paradigm shifts. There's a lot of things that's changed. And I think you can for yourself see how teaching has changed, how we've incorporated technology, how curriculums have changed with so many things we're doing differently. the gamification that we use in teaching. Assessments are different, and I'm very glad to see that you also used a session to talk about workplace-based assessment last year. So we have seen a lot of changing also in the role of the student. And students are no longer seen as clients or consumers, as some people like to call them, but they are partners in the learning program. And at the same time, the teaching and learning field has become professionalized, and health professions education has become a recognized field. There are many journals in the field, there are conferences in the field. It is no longer a small field. It has really become a significant area. So therefore, you might have seen that apart from these more informal activities for networking and broadening your knowledge, there are universities that offer postgrad diplomas in health professions education. There are others that have masters, and then there are even PhDs in health professions education. Gone are the days of see one, do one, teach one for our students, but also for us as educators. Gone are the days that we can rely on seeing one, doing one, and then we are the experts. There's a science in teaching, learning, and assessment. The beautiful link between health professions education and the quality of healthcare has always been something special to me. And I think when people asked me when I left the clinical world, I worked in a critical care unit for years before I became an educator. People asked me whether I missed the patients. And to be honest, I never really missed the patients because the students became my next, I would almost say, patients, because one have that partner. The patient was my partner in the previous time when I worked, and now having students as those partners is very fulfilling. And we as teachers can help for better patient care if we train our students sufficiently. So that just shows the important role that all of us have. Then finally, I really just want to wish your chapter all of the best. And again, thank you, Ilse, for putting the Ilse team. Obviously, I know you have a strong team with you, for putting the Eastern Cape forward as such a strong chapter. It is great to see how many people are attending. And Madeleine, I am sure you will going to have a great conversation this evening. I know the people will not be disappointed now that they've signed in for this. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Elise. We are privileged to have had you with us this evening. Thank you very much. And we know you cannot stay the whole evening, but thank you for joining us. And it's so heartwarming to hear you're also from the Eastern Cape. You're a local with us. But also, thanks very much. And also to all of you who are not from the Eastern Cape, a warm welcome this evening. We are so glad that we've got other provinces also joining us. I'm going to start a share screening now again. Okay, I think you can see my screen now again, colleagues. So, Prof. Elise, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Then I'm going to move over to what we're doing tonight. Our webinar topic for tonight is on toxic learning environments. It's our first webinar of 2025. At the end of tonight, just before we close, Rian and I are going to tell you or give you a sneak preview of what we are planning to offer in our next 3 webinars. So please stay until the end because we think we've got exciting topics that we're going to present to you. So tonight's topic, transforming toxic learning environments. Here you can see the abstract for the presentation. I'm not going to read it. I think you can quickly scan. Transforming toxic learning environments. And then our presenter tonight, Dr. Madeleine Muller from Walter Sisulu University. Dr. Muller, thank you very much for your willingness to again be our speaker at our first webinar of the year. And we want to say to you, congratulations in obtaining your Master's in Health Professions Education from Stellenbosch University in 2024. You are very special to us. We are so glad you're part of our team. I'm going to hand over to you to start your presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. After Dr. Muller's presentation, there will be 10 minutes for questions at the end.
Now I remember, but then I will help you.
Okay, please just mute, if you are attendees, just mute yourselves, please. Dr. Muller, after your presentation, 10 minutes for questions, and then Rian and I will just quickly give all our attendees a sneak preview of what we're planning for the rest of the year. Dr. Muller, very welcome. Congratulations on your master's, and we are looking forward to listen to you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very, very much. Very pleased to be here, and very honored to be opening the webinar series for this year. It's been a really lovely group to work with here in the Eastern Cape, and I think there's some amazing things happening in health professional education across all the different universities. And I think what I really love about SAAHE, it's one of the very few interprofessional organizations where we really work together from all the different professions. And I think that's something we really want to foster in the future, and also in the training of both our undergraduates and postgraduates, is how we start teaching some things we need to teach to across the different professions. And this topic is a very good example of something that actually crosses all the different health professional education environments. And this is actually a sneak peek at quite an exciting project that's happening at the moment, and as part of this work-based place assessment that we are busy rolling out in South Africa and all the postgraduate medical trainings. So all the doctors that are specializing, we are introducing WBA. All the colleges are very busy in the process of that. And the focus this year of WBA is actually training up the clinical supervisors. So as Elise also earlier mentioned, this is becoming professionalized. You know, traditionally you become a senior lecturer, or you become somebody that has a bunch of students or registrars you're looking after, but you haven't necessarily ever been trained on how to train. And now there's a very exciting training that's been put together for the doctors, and we are really looking at cross-pollinating to the other professions as well. And one of the modules within this is on building supportive learning environments. And I've taken sort of little bits out of that course, and we're going to be focusing on some little bit of highlights and some tasters in terms of the supervisor trainings that are coming. So we're going to look at a few, just roughly what you can expect tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is important, and specifically talking about medical error. I'm going to bring some neurophysiology on something called emotional competence that's going to help us understand why we have toxic work environments in the first place. And then we're going to get very practical in how do we actually turn those around. And if we have time, I've got a few slides on one of the actual tools, but we'll see a little bit in terms of how time goes. So firstly, let's just talk about medical error. And I'm going to start off with from our airline industry, and the date is 27 March 1977, and this date is famous for the worst aviation accident in history. So what was happening is there was a KLM flight that was taking off at Tenerife. It was very foggy, flights had been diverted, there was chaos, they couldn't understand the flight controller very well. You know, lots of things were going wrong, obviously. And this captain took off on this runway in this dense fog, and suddenly the fog cleared, and right there on the runway, across the runway, was a Pan Am. And of course, the only thing the captain could do at that point, he didn't have enough speed yet to take off, was to try and jump leap this aeroplane. He pulled back the stick, but of course the landing gear was still out, and it took out the middle of the Pan Am, and the flight crashed in a big ball of fire on the other side. All of the people on the KLM flight died, and 335 people on the Pan Am flight. So the person who was the captain of the flight was Captain Jacob van Zanten. And he was actually the chief pilot of the KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, and was already their corporate vice president. He was, interestingly enough, the director of safety, and he was a really nice guy. Family man, more than 30 years experience, very well respected and very well loved within the airline industry. And when they listened to the black box afterwards to try and figure out what happened, they realized there was various misunderstandings and things that sort of all end up creating this scenario. But both the co-pilot and the flight engineer had picked up that something wasn't right and had said something. And the captain had said, no, it's fine, it's fine. And they both had backed down quite happily and trusted that the captain was right. And so what was interesting is when the investigation happened and they had to look like, whose fault was it? Where did this thing happen? What we would expect to do is to nail this captain to the wall. You know, Jacob van Zanten made a mistake. He misunderstood and he took off on a runway which was not actually clear. But what they realized is that although junior staff in the cockpit had realized there was a problem, they were not actually able to override the captain's confidence. And so the interesting thing about this investigation was they concluded that the problem was not the mistake, but the organizational culture that didn't catch that mistake. So I want you to imagine for a moment that this is a theater, or this is a team within a ward, or a team within a multidisciplinary team, and similarly having a leader within that team that possibly made a mistake. And the organizational culture things they recognized was the culture that the captain or the clinician is always right, and a culture that discounts the value of the crew. And you can replace that with the clinical team. So we've actually, as a medical profession, we've actually looked at the airline industry with great interest. And during the 80s, there was a lot of work happening in the airline industry regarding this organizational culture. And then in 1999, the Institute of Medicine actually brought out a report called To Err as Human, very good reading, about building a safer health system. But not much actually has happened in terms of us addressing the issues that came out in this report. The airline industry, on the other hand, has been very busy, and between 2001 and 2006, there was no airline deaths on any major American airlines. But at the same time, there was an estimated 250,000 to 500,000 patients that died from preventable medical mistakes in American hospitals. So that's the equivalent of crashing about 1,400 fully loaded airplanes with no survivors. And out of these, so following this, there's been various articles around patient safety and specifically looking at this comparison with the aviation industry. And I like this quote. So medical mistakes are human mistakes that are committed in a human system inadequately designed to catch and neutralize those mistakes in time. Humans will always make mistakes. It doesn't matter how much training you've had. It doesn't matter how much experience you have. It doesn't matter how determined you are not to make a mistake. Mistakes are going to happen. And we need to create a culture where those mistakes can get caught. So the mechanism of human mistakes can be lots of different things. You can misperceive something. Just the classic one is misreading a label, making assumption of what you think somebody's already done, or assuming this diagnosis somebody else made was correct, or just simple communication things that go wrong. That's just part of how human beings roll. But the important thing is that the more under pressure you are, and the more we go into survival mode, which we're going to talk a bit more in a moment, the more these mistakes happen. So even if you are very experienced, if you're in a very stressful scenario, or you are tired, or there's a lot of things going on at the same time, things can start going wrong. And so what we want to do is we want to look at how we now shift this organizational structure and culture to prevent these future mistakes. So I want to talk just a moment and start to appreciate what I'm going to call depreciative work environments and appreciative work environments. So what do I mean by depreciative work environment? This is a work environment where a significant number of the interactions between people are negative or depreciative. So it's quite interesting when we talk about difficult working environments. If somebody comes home and says, I hate my job, I hate my work, you will actually find that it's not to do with how busy it is or how resource poor they are or what is actually going on with the physical structure of that job. It has to do with people and how they treat each other. So with depreciative interactions, I'm including criticizing, manipulating, gaslighting, stonewalling, ignoring, sarcasm, interfering in any action, devaluing other people. We've all seen things like that happen in our work environments. And in such a depreciative learning environment, there's sort of certain underlying beliefs in the way we quite often treat our junior students. So that typical thing of, oh, you should already know that rolling our eyes at the kinds of questions they ask or gaps that they have, trying to motivate through humiliation. I'm afraid the medical profession is quite guilty in that, on ward rounds, putting people down. There's something called the Navy SEAL imperative, which the surgeons like. Throw them in the deep end and they must sink or swim. The idea that you tell people and then they must know. And the idea that there's this hierarchy. So there's this very clever people at the top, and you can only learn from the very clever people at the top. And all of this part is also part of a very fixed mindset. So the idea is some people know stuff and some people don't know stuff, and sort of already pegging people early on in terms of what they can or cannot do. The word toxic workplace is actually just an extreme version of a depreciative work environment. And that is when you actually start having infighting, intimidation, or any other affronts that actually harms productivity. So toxic is sort of when this depreciative work environment is actively starting to bring down the quality of care that you are giving. So what is the impact? And there's lots of research in this in terms of these types of organizational cultures. And the big problem is that clinicians don't want to ask for advice. So if you are fearing humiliation or rejection or attack from another person, you're not going to go and ask somebody if you're not sure. Clinicians also become terrified of making a mistake, or if they've made a mistake or they think they might have made a mistake, to admit that mistake. So they become very disempowered within their day. Clinicians are not also inspired. We'll talk a little bit about emotional spaces in a moment. So they don't feel curious or eager to learn. They're not motivated, and they don't see their seniors as resourceful people they can turn to. There's definitely a higher rate of medical errors, and we can see the mechanism of that. But also we're seeing much higher rates of anxiety, depression, and burnout in clinicians. So if you have very stressful environments because of resources, and you put a toxic, depreciative work environment on top of that, that's where you're going to see a lot of burnout. So what are we aiming for? So what is the dream that we all want when we go to work in the mornings? And actually, all of appreciative feedback culture is where the majority of human interactions that are happening is positive or generative or affirming. And that can include compliments, taking an interest in somebody else, humility, kindness, generosity, affirmation, all these sort of higher order qualities. I just want to make a small point, because usually at this point you get people, so I'll put the surgeons on the spot here again, vaguely worried that we're getting too fluffy now. But you can also have an appreciative work environment in a very hierarchical, strict, top-down, high expectation department. So you can have an emergency medicine department with very high expectations and a very clear, strong hierarchical way of working, but you can still have an appreciative work environment. So it's not about what you do. It's not about the kinds of expectations you set, but it's about how you communicate those expectations. So now the underlying beliefs shift, and that you really, really believe that there's no such thing as a stupid questions. You don't roll your eyes when a junior comes and asks something. We motivate people through affirming who they are and what they're already doing well. Before we scare them, we prepare them, whether it's through a drill or through simulation or through other models of practicing stuff before you put them in high pressure environments. We understand that a lot of learning happens through reflection and making opportunity available for that. We know that you can learn from everybody. You don't just have to learn from somebody that's even in the same profession as you. You can learn from a nurse or a rehab person or a pharmacist. And this idea of growth mindset, we can all learn. We can all learn. It's just a matter of creating the opportunities. And this kind of environment creates very much an environment of trust in which medical errors can be caught. So the million-dollar question is, well, why? Why do we not? I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? Everybody in this, I'm confident that everybody sitting here wants to have that kind of work environment and wants to contribute to that kind of work environment. And yet I'm quite sure every single one of us has at some point in our lives contributed to not the pleasantest of work environments. And maybe at work you've managed to stay cool, but maybe not so cool at home. And I now want to start looking at the neurophysiology. This is particularly my interest and my passion. It's been part of my MPhil and HPE. And I'm going to start looking a little bit at a framework to start understanding about why we sometimes behave so badly. So my paradigm or my framework that I'm bringing, my conceptual framework, is based on the work of emotional intelligence as well as emotional competence. And I'm very interested in how we eventually teach these higher order qualities. And to be able to become emotionally competent, and I'll define that a bit better as we go on, we actually have to have some emotional insight. So we're going to quickly look at understanding how emotions drive behavior. We have to become aware of emotions as they arise and the kinds of behaviors that they want to drive. And then we have to learn about how we modify those emotions and behaviors when we're actually in the moment. And of course, this is a whole course in its own right, but I'm just going to touch on some top tips for tonight. So let's just start and talk about emotion and behavior. And basically, the model is very simple. You're on a particular mode that drives a particular emotion that's going to drive a particular behavior. So if we talk about the mode, you can imagine that as you go through your day, every single human being is always in one of two modes. And this is physiological, so it's determined by the hormones in your body. You are in survival mode, where your limbic brain is in charge and you are currently under a bit of threat. Or you're on executive mode, so your survival brain is calmed down and now you're able to access this prefrontal cortex and this higher brain. So when you're in survival mode, it's all about your fight, flight, freeze response. We all know about that. And we have also these very much basic pleasure-seeking drives, and we'll look a little bit at that in a moment when we talk about bias. When we are in survival mode, our focus becomes very focused in the moment. We're very self-centered, and we're very vigilant about possible threat. And we're going to look a little bit about the negative emotions and behaviors that are particularly linked to survival. But what happens is we can become critical and arrogant, intolerant, paranoid, inflexible. These are all qualities of people when they are in survival mode. And at its most extreme, when you are in those modes, you can become aggressive and dangerous. And this is not the brightest part of ourselves. So this you can almost imagine as your worst self. So when you've had a scenario where you think, oh my, why did I do that? Or why did I behave like that, even towards your partner or your child? You can be sure your survival brain had stepped forward at that moment. When all is well and all is calm, we suddenly have access to our higher order functioning. And our prefrontal cortex gives us 4 particular substrate qualities. It gives us the possibility of executive planning. It gives us the possibility of empathy, so to step into somebody else's shoes. We're suddenly able to reflect on ourselves and on things that have happened. And we're able to inhibit some of these impulses coming from our survival mode. So this kind of thinking enables this rational, higher order thinking. And now we're able to see things with perspective. We're able to see a bigger picture. This is linked to our positive emotions specifically. So although the emotions come from our survival brain, we can now incorporate them within our whole executive functioning. And all of these amazing qualities we talk about, agency, reliability, humility, tolerant, being generous, being compassionate, all human beings potentially have access to those qualities if they have access to the executive brain and that part is predominant. So this is where you're at your most supportive and loving. When you're being that amazing doctor or that amazing pharmacist or dietitian or nurse, that is when that part of yourself has stepped forward. And you can see this as your best self that comes to the fore. It's important to realize there's a switch between these two modes, and it's physiological. So it gets triggered specifically by adrenaline. So that's the mode. The mode is going to trigger specific emotions. So emotion has been created by our survival system to get us to do stuff. So they're biological impulses to do something. And I'm very much drawing on the work of Jack Panksepp of affective neuroscience, where he's been able to look and describe very neurophysiologically the primal emotions, both negative and positive, that drives behavior. And all of our complex emotions are combinations of these things. So the 3 primal negative emotions is fear. So that's the biological impulse to move away from something. There's rage, interesting one, the biological impulse to destroy an obstacle in your way. You've all felt what it feels like when you're wanting to destroy that obstacle in your way, but of road rage. And we've all been at the receiving end of somebody seeing us as that obstacle to destroy, very, very alarming. And then distress is the biological impulse to cry out. It's what small animals and children have when they are abandoned, to be able to cry out and hopefully somebody will come. The emotion of distress is extreme, immense emotional pain. And when we think of mood conditions like depression, for example, or people who get stuck within this extraordinary emotional pain mode, and that also very much related to things like suicide, for example. These negative emotions are emotions that survival mode use. They are reactive to try and deal with things that's happening in our environment. We also have positive emotions. We have care. So this is oxytocin driven, and it's the biological impulse to give and receive care, whether it's to your child or your partner or your parent. We have an emotion of play. So the actual biological impulse to enjoy something. So just like small animals play to build their own little tribes, as human beings, we've got art and hobbies and sport and culture that binds us together as a community. And I love this one. We have a biological impulse to be curious and to explore. So animals also have a reward system for looking at what's going on in the environment. And for human beings, this positive emotion of seek is directly linked to our higher frontal lobes and prefrontal cortex. And this is where we love when we're enjoying problem solving, when we like figuring something out. Hopefully you're all sitting in seek space at the moment as you're busy learning something new or making you think about all kinds of other interesting things when we are doing research. And when we are learning, this is the space we want to be in. And I always muse about how well are we to actually create this space, learning space within our learning environments. We're quite often so focused on what people have to learn, but how do we actually help and inspire them to be within the seek space? And you can only access these positive emotions when you are predominantly within this executive mode. So these emotions now are going to lead to very specific behaviors. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I'm just going to give you a few examples. There's the book, the person who's actually described this so beautifully is Shajat Chamin. That's the Saboteur self-assessment code there on the side. And you can go and do a little survey online. It's very fun. And you can identify what counterproductive behaviors do you have that's driven by your emotion. So you have that emotion to want to do something, and that can lead to very specific activities to try and make us feel that we're actually engaging. So the kind of activities is, for example, your fight mechanisms. You might find that when you're stressed or anxious, you have an impulse to criticize others. You might have an impulse to either overanalyze or to have long lectures and preach to people. We all love preaching to our poor patients when they have missed their appointments. Or we might be manipulating, gaslighting, or bullying other people. And these are all things that we actually feel it's quite satisfying to engage in these behaviors because it makes us feel like we're doing something. The freeze fawn mechanisms include pleasing, so sacrificing your own voice and your own ideas to try and appease a situation, getting obsessive compulsive lies within this as well. And we've all had the hypervigilant, lying awake in the middle of the night worrying about things that you can't actually solve. Some people will engage more with flight mechanisms, so just avoid a scenario or just not engage with something. I think we've all had moments where we felt very sorry for ourselves, especially if you're working late or you're on call or it's very busy. And then distractor is interesting because a lot of, we all have, when you are very stressed, it's quite nice just to go and do something else for a bit. It becomes a problem if that particular activity does not help you solve the issue you're supposed to solve. But distractor is also, for some people, using substances becomes the way they deal with their anxiety and deal with that emotion. And that is then at the root of all of your addictions. And you can't manage addiction unless you've actually managed the mechanism that they are using to deal with their anxiety. So let's just look in terms of how these behaviors have been designed and why they're such a problem in modern society. So the challenge with the fight, flight, freeze mechanisms is that they were designed for physical threat. So I like to go running on the beach. You can imagine there's a dog running towards you barking. You have an emotion that is fear. So you've got the biological impulse to move away. And your reaction is to now shout at the dog, to run out of the way, or to freeze where you're at. Just seeing my connection is unstable. Okay. So this is sort of a very sensible way to deal with a physical threat. But saboteurs is when we now use those behaviors to try and deal with the relationship. So these same behaviors that becomes very sensible in a physical threat sabotages. So now you're having an argument with your partner, you're feeling unsafe. So this triggers either fear or rage or grief. It's a very unpleasant emotion. It makes you want to do something. And now you start criticizing or avoiding or lecturing, and guaranteed these behaviors is going to make the scenario worse. So and this is just a little slight aside, and this is what I specifically want to go and look at in my PhD, is that when we then talk about teaching higher order skills, right? We want to teach our young clinicians to be compassionate, to be humble, to be reliable, to have integrity. If you use this paradigm of looking at emotional competence from this point of view, we can therefore say that if people are being destructive or unhelpful or making things worse, what is happening is that they are in survival mode, right? When people are at their best, so if they're honest and reliable and kind and helpful, all these lovely qualities we're talking about, what you're actually meeting is somebody when they're in this executive mode. And so if we want to teach people on how to be a better person, for example, we want to teach a clinician how to be compassionate, maybe we don't teach them about the importance of being kind. Maybe all we need to do is teach them how to manage this survival system. And yeah, I see their dragon. I haven't mentioned the dragon. That's just my analogy for the survival system is this beautiful, slightly stupid dragon. And then our executive brain is a master that needs to learn to master this dragon. So when I'm looking at how do we teach these higher order skills, I'm curious as if we can teach emotional competence, a bit like I'm doing this evening, can we help people to learn how to manage their dragons better, their survival system better, and therefore access these higher qualities? Some food for future thought. So I now want to start looking at other factors that are building into this, specifically how this starts building into toxic work environments. And I want to talk about two specific survival systems that kick in. The one is to talk about unconscious bias and to talk about power dynamics within the workplace. So unconscious bias, Prof. Mchacha, who's from Walter Sisulu University, they've just published this lovely paper about unconscious bias in postgraduate specialist education. And the definition that she uses there is that unconscious bias involves making decisions, interpreting situations, making assumptions about people based on past experiences, stereotypes, ingrained thoughts, and deep-seated ideas. And you can imagine, remember we talked about the survival system, we have this unconscious drive for tribe. So as human beings, the same as with animals, we have this unconscious belief that we are safer in groups, probably true, and that the way you find a safe group is you find others that are similar to you. So we have a natural instinct that if somebody looks like us or talks like us or dresses like us, same age as us, we feel slightly more safe with those people. Just be clear, this is not rational. Just because somebody is similar to you does not mean that they're necessarily safe. But this is an instinctive way of looking at the world. It's this drive that makes us build our nationalities and have our flags and brand and all of those kinds of things. But it kicks in every time we're in an unfamiliar situation. So if you're feeling slightly unsafe and you're meeting a new person or you're meeting an unfamiliar scenario, our first impulse, if they're very different from ours, is to be suspicious or nervous or skeptical. So you can imagine that every human being has an inner part that can potentially be either racist or misogynist or homophobic or transphobic or ableist or ageist or whatever, which it simply has to do with meeting somebody that's very different from yourself and having sort of an instinct of, oh, it's different, not so sure. Fortunately, we do have an executive brain that's able to counter this unconscious bias and becoming aware of our own biases. And when we create systems, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusivity, we are actually trying to create systems that will counter this unconscious bias that we all have and need to be aware of. The second system we want to look at is power dynamics. And this is very important also within our setting because academic environments and hospital environments are very hierarchical and actually has got huge potential power dynamics already built in. So as human beings, we also have an automatic drive for power. So if you are in a society or in a relationship, the more power you have in that relationship, the safer you are. So this can include political power, the higher you are up the ladder, financial power in a capitalist country, the more money you have, social clout. And we all have a little bit on that level, also this irrational belief that one person maybe has more right to opinion or resources or decisions, and that has to do with usually me and my people should get slightly preference when the chips are down, so to speak. This is very helpful wheel of power that we're going to do a little exercise on in a minute, which shows how certain unearned qualities might in our societies put you closer to the center of power in the world that we live in the global society we're in, and makes it easier for you to change the world around you and have an influence on your own life. And then on the margins, are people who are, because of unearned disadvantages, things that's just the way they were born or the families they were born into, that actually puts them much further away from power, and they're much more vulnerable and not able to change the world they live in. So this drive for power creates hierarchical systems. So whenever you have a hierarchy, whether it's a monarchy or a chief at the top or the caste system in India, we are dealing with actually to do with this survival system of ourselves. And actually, if you think about it, that's the way the world has rolled for thousands of years. We're actually very comfortable with those kinds of hierarchies. When we talk about intersectionality, we talk about how the more of these unearned disadvantages you have, the more vulnerable you become. But similar, the more of these qualities you have that's close to the center of power, the more powerful you become. So let's have a little look at that, or we'll have a look at that in a moment, just from a reflection point of view. I brought this slide in just because of the times we are living in the moment. And it's kind of interesting to look at the world because we can see how this old survival way of looking at the world is currently direct contradiction with the way we are developing as human beings. So our survival mode is what I'm going to call the paradigm that is linked to our survival mode is that of the elitist. So elitists believe that some human beings have more value than others. And so usually when they then create the hierarchy, those with power will then decide who sits on the top of the hierarchy and who gets designated to the bottom. So whenever you have a society where there's principles of supremacy, domination, oppression, we're looking only after these groups, all of your racism, misogyny, all of that, we are talking about an elitist system. And we can see with the USA at the moment, and Trump's not even apologetic about the fact that they are building an elitist system in America. So our executive mode, our prefrontal cortex, is mostly egalitarian. So the egalitarian part of ourselves is this part that's able to have perspective. And this is the belief of that paradigm, is that all human beings have equal value. Regardless of who you are, we all have the same amount, we all have the same rights within the societies we live in. And a democracy sort of aims towards that. So again, when we talk about diversity, equality, equity, inclusivity, all the things that the USA is currently dismantling, those are actually these executive mode principles. When we talk about ethics, ethics was born out of an egalitarian view of the world. So for example, elitists don't have ethical principles. It's interesting to know that as human beings, when you meet somebody that's very different from yourself, you might naturally have a little elitist reaction in your survival mode, and then you have a little bit of sometimes that might actually be in tension with your egalitarian higher beliefs. So this is an exercise. We're not going to spend time on that. At the end of the presentation, I'll point you to my website where you can actually go and do these things in your own time. But it's just to show you, if you think in terms of where you are sitting with these particular 12 qualities, and I'm going to use Trump as an example because that's the world we live in. So in terms of what gives him more power within the global society, is the fact that he's white, a citizen, a cisgendered male, heterosexual, English, rich, owns property, mentally stable, neurotypical, able-bodied, and has a post-secondary education. All of this, he literally ticks all the boxes. One of the things I want you just to notice a little bit is that for all the boxes where you tick high power, and for those of us that are all in post-secondary education, we probably tick a few of those boxes, just to notice who are the opposite, the low power people within that. And quite often when we view these people, it can actually go in two ways. So imagine a homeless person who's living in the suburb down the road from you, who's got himself a little shack there. So this is somebody who is homeless. You are somebody who actually owns a house in the suburb, and you will probably have, part of you might actually have are frustrated with this person in your community, or you might actually be somebody who is fighting to actually help get them better housing and better and more access to care, for example. So we sort of go into different directions with those that are very different from ourselves, and it's just good to observe that. So at the moment, it's not so much about where you are, it's more about noticing your reaction to those that are different than yourself. This we're not going to cover it all now. That's in that the study that, of the paper that Prof. Mkhaga has published. But there's actually this lovely thing called the implicit association test, which you can go and do online, and it will help you figure out your own unconscious biases that you might not even be aware of. It's all very clever. But let's start now actually looking at toxic work environments. So we've talked about unconscious bias and power dynamics driving these. But the big thing that one needs to be aware of when you look at your environment is that it actually has to do with the survival mode of the staff on your team. That is also why environments can sometimes vary from day to day, depending on who's in the team and depending on what's happening. So just to give you an example of an actual toxic workplace. Let's assume there's a person, and usually they're quite high up in the hierarchy in the team, and that person is feeling unsafe or stressed for whatever reason. They get anxious, or they're irritated, or they're upset. And those emotions, remember, triggers all those counterproductive behaviors. Now they are preaching somebody else, or they're criticizing them, or they're trying to manipulate them, or they're stonewalling them. This makes another person feel unsafe or stressed within that environment. That triggers their own emotions. Now they start responding by either criticizing or preaching or avoiding or whatever the scenario is, which makes this person even more grumpy, and round the lovely cycle we go. So very simple, when we talk about stress, toxic workspaces, we're talking about stress. Stress creates the toxicity, and the toxicity creates more stress. So we have to start becoming aware of why might our team be in survival mode? Why might any of the persons on the shop floor today, or within the ward, or within the outpatients, or wherever you are working, why today are things feeling sort of slightly out of control? So any one human being can be under threat for some reason. So if you're shouting at somebody's getting shouted at, obviously that's going to make them feel unsafe. If anybody feels like they're emotionally being excluded or disliked or rejected or not included, that's going to make them feel unsafe. And obviously, if we are humiliating somebody or insulting somebody or not allowing them to express their, for example, gender identity or sexual orientation or race or whatever it may be, all of those things can make people feel unsafe, and it's going to put them in survival mode. But it's also helpful to understand that sensitivity is different in different people. And one of the things I really want to start countering in our paradigms of when we look at staff is that quite often you find that some people are just quite thick-skinned. You know, they for whatever reasons, they've had usually quite often fairly safe upbringings themselves, and it's all like water off a duck's back. And sometimes that creates this thing, what they call the snowflake. When they talk about snowflakes, when we talk about people being snowflakes or being too sensitive or being so sensitive, none of those terms are complementary. We use sensitivity as if it is an insult or if it is a problem. And the reality is within diversity, there are people who are certainly much more sensitive to threat. And quite often that also makes them much more sensitive in terms of their interactions with human beings. So quite often it's a strength. But we actually need to look at how we create environments that look after even the more sensitive people in our teams. So just being more junior, your brand new kids straight out of university coming in, your students are much more lower on the hierarchical rung and therefore much more vulnerable to stresses that's happening. You don't know what's happening in people's lives. So they might be going through difficulties at home, relationship stuff that's going on, financial stress that's going on. People might have experienced trauma and abuse that might get triggered by things that's happening in that environment. If somebody is struggling with a health issue or struggling with a mental health issue, that's going to make them much more vulnerable. And then for those that are neurodiverse or neurospicy, if they're autistic or they have ADHD, they might have a high sensitivity to sensory impressions. It's going to make them much easily to be triggered. And you get something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which we see with especially in ADHD, which means they get very, very sensitive to rejection and to criticism. So all of this is things we need to start becoming aware of to be able to create a safer environment in which everybody can thrive. So this is just something I want you to think about, and we're not going to spend much time on it, but I want you to pick an environment that you're working in. It can be a particular, whatever hospital or clinic or facility that you're in. It can be your particular department or a particular ward or a particular outpatient or whatever it is. And just think from 1 to 5, where are you at, where would you place your particular environment? Would you say on average, overall, it's very toxic, there's no trust at all? And number 2 is it unpleasant? Is it quite stressful relationship with quite stressful relationships going on? Is it quite neutral? It's not awful, but it's not great. I go up, go to work, go home. Is it pleasant? Nice place to go. There's no major conflicts going on. Or is it one of those awesome, amazing teams that pulls together and do amazing stuff? And now what you can do, and again, I'm going to give this as homework. This is what we do in the full workshop. You can start thinking when you notice at which level you're at, what factors from the ones we've just discussed is actually contributing to that particular environment that you're experiencing within your setting. So let's start, what do we do about all of this? So I'm going to look at 3 different things. We're going to talk about the physical factors, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about the role of role modeling within those departments. And then we're going to look at some practical team building stuff. So physical factors, I think this we all know. Obviously, it is not all about just relationships. If you're working in extremely difficult circumstances, that's definitely going to put people's stress levels up. So if somebody's been awake for more than 21 hours, they are at the same performance level of somebody who's over the limit. And a good way of doing it is actually getting feedback from your staff, doing a little survey on working conditions and making sure they're getting enough breaks. Are they actually having lunch? Is the bathrooms acceptable? And figuring out what's happening within the patient flow, etc., to make the work a little bit more of an easier work environment. But I want to talk about role modeling, and the interesting thing, it's both a pro and a con, I guess, is that the person at the top of the team, that because we're so hierarchical, the person who's leading the team, the people with the most power within that particular team, has got the biggest effect on what's going to happen within that workplace culture. So if you imagine, for example, a multidisciplinary team meeting, maybe on a ward round setting, and you've got your whole, you've got your pharmacists, your nurses, your doctors, the whole bunch there. And the person who's leading that ward round is grumpy and irritable and is short and is humiliating some of the juniors on the ward round. That's going to have an effect on how everybody is behaving towards each other in that group. But again, if you've got somebody who's leading that team and is enthusiastic and encouraging and affirming and high fives and good job and all of that, that's going to be a completely different atmosphere in that particular team meeting. So the emotion of the team leader is going to set the tone. And therefore, one of the biggest jobs for us as clinical educators is we actually have to look at ourselves first. We have to manage our own dragons if we want to actually start having an effect on our working environment. So we've now done quite a bit on emotional insight. We understand how our mode leads to a certain emotion, leads to a certain behavior. That's emotional insight. And I think already just knowing this helps. The next thing is being able to start catching the emotions as they arise. They're very unconscious things, and they come up before we even notice. So human beings have this amazing ability called dual awareness. So our prefrontal cortex makes it possible for us to think about our thinking. And you can think about your thinking, about the fact that you can think about your thinking. It's quite extraordinary, and the animal kingdom cannot do this. So our aim is to start to become aware of a negative emotion or a counterproductive behavior as early as possible. You can't always change the fact that the emotion is going to come. Remember, it's physiological. There's hormones coursing through your body. But you want to be able to start picking up and noticing and thinking, I'm angry, or I'm anxious, or I am upset. Noticing an emotion then actually gives you a choice on how you're going to respond. And if you're able to observe from this, the way you know that you are actually observing this from your executive self is if you can look at yourself and actually have a feeling of compassion and curiosity for, oh, okay, why is this going on for me now? What is happening? So over time, we want to develop this ability to move into dual awareness. And the idea is that if you're in a scenario, so if you're in the work environment and a conversation is not going well, it can even just be one that you're observing, or it can be a conversation you are in. It can be with anybody in the team, with a patient, whatever scenario. And you can just feel, no, this is feeling very depreciative at the moment. Just being able to ask yourself, hold on, am I in survival mode? is this other person that I'm talking to in survival mode. So even though you can't necessarily always change the emotion in that moment, the first thing you just want to learn is to not go into those automatic behaviors that are so keen to come up. You know, we get so tempted to criticize. It's so satisfying to do that long lecture. And being able to realize if you bring your dragon to the party, that's when everything is going to start. That's when the wheels are going to come off. So one of the biggest superpowers that you actually have when you are in executive mode and when everybody around you is in dragon mode, or just a way that you can actually deal with your own dragon, is using compassion. So compassion gives us the possibility to create safety and to calm dragons down. So also we already know that if you're in a scenario, for example, in emergency medicine, and you've got a person who is psychotic or a person who's aggressive, we already know that bringing calm and safe and compassion to that scenario is your best chance of actually calming it down. Although compassion doesn't necessarily say, so you're going to solve every single scenario, what it will not do is make things worse. So I can guarantee you any of the other behaviors that you feel like engaging in, be it criticizing or lecturing or avoiding or whatever, is probably going to make the scenario worse, where compassion has the possibility to potentially solve it, or at least to not worsen the scenario. And we want to therefore accept these dragons. They're there. They're part of who we are as human beings. When your own dragon comes up, you know, if you fight with your dragon, you're also still in dragon mode. And being able to bring this calm, warm curiosity to other people's dragons, to our own dragons, this is this executive mode from which we want to be functioning. So let's now go to, and as I say, I'm taking snippets. So the last snippet we want to look at is actually then, what do we now do to manage these behaviors? And quite often we now think, okay, I'm now supposed to just, you know, behave and be calm, but you can't tell yourself, it's not a psychological trick to deal with emotion or counterproductive behaviors, because it's a physiological reality. Your emotion is being driven by a whole bunch of hormones, and your whole body is physiologically affected by those hormones. So if you want to change the stress that you are experiencing, you actually have to bodily intervene into that production of that adrenaline. So just to remind us, and for the, yeah, so the doctors are very aware of those, or any of those of you that deal with panic attacks. So just a reminder, if you're under threat of any kind, your survival brain kicks in and your body's going to make all that adrenaline. Your adrenaline now creates changes in your body. So your shoulders go up, your blood pressure goes up, your breathing goes up, you go all tense because you're now going to fight this thing that is you're supposed to be fighting. And your brain starts noticing everything that could possibly go wrong. You go into this hypervigilant mood. So you start creating these very negative thoughts. These very negative thoughts create more threat because you're now thinking of all the other things that might go wrong, and round the merry way we go. These two techniques of interrupting this cycle is what we also teach people when they get panic attacks. It's what we teach people with anxiety disorders. So firstly, we try and actually let the adrenal glands know, that's making the adrenaline, that we're no longer fighting, that the fight is over. And one of the ways you therefore do it is if you relax your body, and we all know, you know, take 10 deep breaths, or, you know, relax all the muscles, settle your shoulders down. What you're actually doing is you're sending a feedback cycle to your adrenal glands to go, oh no, hold on, I'm no longer fighting, dangerous past, and the adrenal glands will switch off the adrenaline. So there's some lovely apps with relaxation exercises, etc., that one can do to practice that. The second thing, and quite often one can combine these two, is to manage the thought feedback that is this terrible thoughts that's busy driving this adrenaline cycle. So mindfulness has become very popular as a methodology of concentrating on something in the present. So you can either concentrate very intensely, for example, on your breathing, so noticing your breath in and your breath out. We all know the breathing exercises. You can concentrate on a visual thing that you're looking at. You can concentrate on something that you're listening to. A very nice exercise is rubbing your forefinger and thumbs together till you can feel like the ridges of your fingers And these are all ways to try and focus your thinking so much on a sensory impression in the present that you clear your mind from all of these thoughts. Combining these two makes it possible to bring down your adrenal level, which helps you to retain and get your brain back. So the third thing I want to then just look at is some practical things around if you just as a clinical supervisor in your team, and this is sort of executive, almost immunizations that you do to try and help create these positive learning environments. So quite often we have higher values as a department. You have your Bartopela app somewhere on a wall. But it's to really start looking at how do we make that living within a department. So when we're talking about inclusivity and respect and generosity in assumptions, how do we create that as a real culture within the department? So we talk about it, we teach it, we have discussions like these, that in this department, these things are paramount. We are kind to each other, we are respectful towards each other, we are inclusive of everybody in this department, and we strive towards creating those kinds of teams. So a lot of the courses we're now doing and this clinical supervisor training that we are doing is actually teaching people, therefore, on how to give feedback. So we've talked earlier about the fact that we want to catch mistakes and medical errors. So what do you now do if you've had a junior or a student that's made a massive mistake? And now you have to give feedback on that mistake, or you just have a scenario where somebody's presenting a case or presenting a patient and there are major gaps in that. And there are very, very lovely methodologies in how we can give feedback. And maybe that will be quite a nice session we can do for SAAHE as well. Those feedback methods is ways to create feedback that encourages reflection, helps to affirm what's done well, and help people to actually close those gaps in a way that makes them feel safe and helps them to grow and learn and be inspired. So one of the things that's nice to look at is to actually think about how much are we creating positive spaces, and we actually have to actively build those. I talked about those lovely 3 positive emotions. So how can we build care into our department? I find the young junior doctors talk a lot about need for having actually like a counselor or support or somebody they can access when they are struggling, and being able to bring warmth to the people around us. This is also important, for example, in debriefing. If you've had a patient that has passed away, for example, how do we create actually a warm space for the team that's been looking after that person to really debrief and go and give each other emotional support. We also need to be a bit better about actually playing together and creating social interactions and spaces where we can also just enjoy and build society together. And then I'm very interested in this. How do we create active seeking spaces? So spaces where we're all keen to learn, to research, to figure stuff out. We are happy to get feedback. We are happy to give feedback. And there's an active atmosphere within our learning environment that we are all learning every single day. And we therefore are excited about asking questions and about being given advice. So this is just a little reflection that you also can take home. So remember, we talked about that level that you were at in your environment. Where are you between a level 1 to 5? And now just to consider one intervention. If you had to change something at work, what do you think might be able to shift it up to just one higher level? And if you're already at level 5, try and imagine what is the main thing that's actually got it to level 5 and it's going to help keep it there. So is it a physical change that you can make, for example, in the workplace and its systems? Is it having to do with something as this creating this clinical supervisor and working with creating this affirmative atmosphere and space within that environment? Or do we need to actually have a specific initiative in the department, like a values-driven thing or a training like we're doing here this evening to help everybody start getting the skills they need to build these appreciative teams? And I'm just checking my time. I think I've still got my watch has stopped working. Ilse, what's the time?
It is 7:39. You can carry on for another 5.
I've got 10 minutes. I've got a few last slides. So
Perfect.
this is just actual advanced feedback technique that I want to show you. And just to show you where it fits in. So this is sort of everything we've covered this evening. There's a trigger in the environment that creates a distressing emotion. We want to be able to become aware of that emotion as it comes up. That emotion has a risk of leading to some sort of counterproductive behavior, and we want to control those behaviors before they mess with the rest of the environment. We want to deal with our stress response through those lovely techniques to calm down our survival brain. And when we've managed to do all of that, we actually reach this lovely balcony level, you know, that best self, that part of ourselves that just has the perspective, has the higher view. And when you are in this view, you actually can start using, there's some very lovely master skills. And it's interesting when I teach this, people actually realize, well, actually, when things are going, when I'm in the right space, I do a lot of this automatically. So some people already automatically can do that because we are able to use our reflection and our empathy. But if you struggle with communication, or if you're going to have a really difficult conversation, sometimes it's nice to have a little technique that one can use when you're in master mode. So the idea of appreciative feedback is to obviously listen before we talk, to always affirm what is done well and build on that, to be gracious with mistakes. We want to avoid criticizing and belittling people, and we're going to use each interaction as an opportunity to teach. But I want to look at something called appreciative inquiry, and I want to imagine that you're about to have a conversation with somebody about something that's kind of difficult, and you want to put a little bit of prep in on how you're going to do this sort of master level communication. So appreciative inquiry, the book on the right is a very nice reference in terms of teaching appreciative inquiry as a way of communication. And the idea is that when we are talking, a sentence that we say can either be appreciative or depreciative, and it can either be a question or a statement. So that gives us, we love these like 2x2 boxes, don't we? So I'll just give you examples to clarify. So if you've got a question that is depreciative, so a negative question, this we call a destructive conversation. So this is when people go, what are you doing? What is wrong for you? What do you think you are? Where did you come from? What university did you study at? It's those kinds of questions that is not actually wanting an answer. And it's extremely demeaning and humiliating to another person. And this causes massive safety issues. These are no conversations. Critical conversations is if you just give somebody negative feedback. That is wrong. You don't know what you're doing. This is incorrect. And there are particular moments, you don't want to use it very often, where it might be necessary, especially if there's in a risky situation or a dangerous situation, you might actually have to make a negative statement. But generally, you want to minimize your critical sentences as much as possible. Affirmative conversations is that's just the typical giving a compliment that was well presented. And one of the tips with affirmative conversations is to describe what you see, affirmative description of what you see, rather than you are so good at this or so good at that. Rather describe what you see. But what I want to spend a couple of seconds on is appreciative inquiry. And that is the idea of asking a question that's going to generate a positive, rich conversation. So appreciative inquiry is being able to ask questions that helps to engage people in helping to solve a problem. And I'm going to show you how we do that. So the idea is we obviously have to be in our calm, warm, curious mode. And where you start off with is you're going to create an affirmative statement first before you're going to go to a generative question. So we want to craft an affirmative statement using positive framing, and we want to be able to show more of what we want more of and where we want to go. So rather than challenging somebody on all the things that are wrong and why they are wrong, we want to see where we want to move to. And the technique I'm going to show you is called flipping to framing. So for example, you've got a student or a colleague or a junior that's always late for work, right? And now you're going to call them in and you're going to have a conversation about the fact that they're always late for work. And what you're going to do is when you prepare, you're going to write down what is it that you don't want. So you don't want them to always be late for work, right? So you're going to flip it and you're going to find a positive opposite of where we want to go to. So what we want is we want them to arrive on time. And we're going to frame it by linking it to a positive outcome, preferably positive for that particular person. So I want them to arrive on time because this is going to provide a positive professional role model to the junior doctors. So your sentence will look something like this. So I need you to arrive on time in the mornings as I believe it will add to your professionalism and provide a positive role model to junior doctors. So notice we're not avoiding the issue. The person is as clear as you are about the fact the issue is that they have been late. but we're starting a conversation looking forward into the future. We're not going to interrogate about why they're always late. This is where we want to get to, and this is the reason why we want to get to that place. And now we're going to create a generative question. We're going to adopt an attitude of curiosity. So it's all about the tone, and you're not going to look back. You're going to look into the future. So how do you see where we want to go? You know, last year you were on time a lot before. What worked well for you? What do you think will work well for you this year? What might be possible? And you want to ask the kind of question that's going to focus on the best of what can be. When you start crafting your questions, you want to think to yourself, will this question generate positive ideas? So we don't want to get into all the things that won't work. We want to focus on helping this person identify what will work. So just something to take home, a little bit of something to go and practice. Think of one undesirable behavior that a colleague or somebody in your department is displaying. Remember, name it, flip it into a positive, frame it in a positive outcome, and start thinking about a generative question you can ask to help solve that particular problem. That's it. So in conclusion, we are trying to shift paradigms. So medical education has actually been very unconscious. And I think as a society, actually, you know, this idea of working from an egalitarian view of the world is actually quite new. And you can see in the global society, we still have this very strong forces, you know, that's very much based around the survival way of functioning. And so if we want to shift, we want to slowly start shifting the way we think about education and the way we think about learning environments. Step one, we need a little bit of self-insight. We need to understand our own dragons, and we need to learn how to manage those dragons. And secondly, it's as simple as out of that, being able to understand yourself, being able to learn how to be kind to one another. Thank you very much. That is that's my little website where I've got a Master Your Dragon series at the moment that goes in a lot of detail, some of the things that we have covered here at the moment. Thank you very much, and we can open a little bit to questions and discussion.
Dr. Madeleine, big thank you. This was brilliant. I wish we had another 2-3 hours. The power of words, the power of words, and then you bring your body language with that, and that's a packet of dynamite. This is brilliant. Thank you so much. Just before we open for questions, is there a short course, or is there anything that we can do where we can be trained if we're not a medical doctor?
Well, what I'm very interested in is if there are interprofessional people who want, so we've created this, it's actually 2 full days, contact days on WBA. This module is a 3-hour module that I've created. It's called Know Yourself, Your Environment, and Your Learner. And I'm very interested in how we, maybe for the SAAHE conference or whatever, that we create a module that I'm very happy for people to just take, you know what I mean? It's sort of, it's very new work. It's sort of based from very much on my own perspectives. But I'm very interested in how we start making these kinds of modules available within our education. So my PhD is going to be on how do we teach emotional competence in undergraduate medical education. And then I will particularly then actually research particular educational interventions to see how much of a difference it makes. But my theory is that just having the insight already makes a huge difference. So in our own family, we use dragons to communicate about what's happening with ourselves, and that helps us to diffuse situations before they get out of control, just because we all in the family have the insight about how emotions are affecting our environments. And even some of my registrars are already very familiar with my dragons because I bring them in everywhere. Will sometimes say to me, yesterday my dragon was completely off sync, you know, and I'm sorry if I did that, you know, but I was really strict. You know, they're able to have that self-reflection and that self-insight on why we sometimes behave like we do. So yes, I'll be very interested to run like a half-day workshop and then to teach people to take this materials and do it in their own departments and in their own settings. Yeah.
I'm wondering, colleagues, if you want to post questions in the chat box, and then Dr. Muller can answer as many of them as is possible in the few minutes that we've got left. I'm wondering about the Train the Trainer course as a follow-up to tonight's session. A Train the Trainer course for any educator. Yeah. that so that we bring this to our Eastern Cape chapter, because and our colleagues from other provinces, it can be done online, I assume, ne?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm doing it face to face at the moment, and I want to try, we're going to experiment with a 3-hour webinar eventually. I've got 7 little exercises that I've sort of hinted to some of them that we go through, and where people identify their own saboteurs and identify their own emotions. And yeah, so I'll be very interested to do something like that. That'll be very lovely, yeah. And then it's a very nice interprofessional thing to do as well.
Yes.
And yeah, definitely an online course. And then I've already got a YouTube channel. We'll send that round. Maybe we'll put that in for the course I've done for the clinical supervisor course, I've created all these exercises. I've made short little videos on how to do each of the exercises and the background. So that's already available on YouTube. It's actually under the WUSU Family Medicine and Rural Health website. But we can send that round as well. So if people want to work through the stuff on their own, absolutely. And then we can eventually create a package that people can then train.
Excellent. I really think this is so necessary in the way we are currently as health educationalists. I really think this is very, very important to equip ourselves, to upskill ourselves. Colleagues, Philip can, in the background, Philip said he will allow participants to unmute and ask questions as well. So if any of you have a burning question, just put up your hand. We are 77 participants at the moment, so I may not be able to see all hands. Or alternatively, just unmute. We've got about 5 minutes for questions, and then Rian and I just want to conclude very quickly. Anastasia, your hand is up.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this session. I'm calling in from Gauteng. I'm a clinical educator at VIT, and Madeleine, this is excellent. Currently, I'm finding that over and above the stress that you have with the hierarchical system, there's also this same layer aggression that is happening among students, especially clinical years students. And I'm wondering, I know that this is more about the workplace and its toxicity, but wanting to also apply some of the principles that you've spoken to in dealing with peer relations or peer relationships in clinical groups and things like that. Do you have any insights, or is it the same? Can we apply the same model? Because I find that they witness to themselves and then they step into the workplace becomes a registrar.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, so my original work was actually, I've been teaching versions of emotional competence. I've been talking about dragons for more than a decade now. But my original work was actually, I was a school doctor in the UK, actually. And I was doing this work with teachers and adolescents. So my first so my first emphasis was originally on, I used to teach sex education specifically, and then I realized I can't talk about sex because everybody's, dragons just going everywhere. And so then I do with the teachers, I do a 2-hour emotional competence training with the teachers, and then I do a sex education training with the teachers, and I talk about relationships and sex. So my original work was actually around relationships, particularly sexual, intimate relationships, and then with teenagers specifically. So helping because the survival system is fully ready by 14. So by the age of 14, you've got a fully developed limbic brain endocrinological system, but the prefrontal cortex fully matures. It's already partly matured during the teenage years, and then finally matures by 23, 24. So many of our students are still busy developing. And so I find it very interesting. That's why I'm so keen on doing it in undergraduate education, because it's kind of harder when you're much older and you've got a fixed mindset and you're trapped in survival mode. It's harder to learn. Where I find the young students are still there's still a lot of neuroplasticity and a very keen interest on understanding emotion and relationships. So yes, I teach this very much within relationships. I also teach this very much in the field of advocacy, diversity, and prejudice. So yeah, and that will also can be more included in the bigger training. So if you go to the WUSU Family Medicine and Rural Health YouTube channel, there's one on sexual and gender health, and there's presentations specifically on relationships and sex over there. Meba.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Madeleine. It's just beautiful listening to you. Very thought-provoking presentation. I loved, just wanted to ask questions, and I believe we would talk more. One of the last slides where you said changing the paradigm. I think that's very, very important. We really need to work actively toward creating an environment which is more of learning, you'd say. On my side, I would say more of a therapeutic healing space. But then the example you gave from the beginning, the true story with the pilot, I'm thinking in terms of issue of leadership and shared responsibilities. Because sometimes what we do as well is that if one of us is being nasty to someone particular, those who are not involved, but they've seen, they are witness, they keep quiet. And that creates an implicit culture of saying, yeah, you are allowed to do that, you're allowed to. So I wish that what the technique you have shared with us should be used by everyone, even if you are not involved or you have not been a victim or an ugly situation. You should be able to stand for someone else. Or if there is a mistake happening, it should be a collective responsibility to say, if I don't say anything and if anything happened, even if I was not involved directly, it's still my responsibility. But otherwise, thanks a lot. I look forward to more development in this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a very small comment on that is there's also this, yes, Ilse?
No, sorry, one last question after Zandile, and then we need to conclude. But please first answer.
Okay, let's go straight to the other question now, from a time point of view. I can talk about this forever. Let's not do that. Sandile.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to ask the question, and thank you for the presentation. I think it's nice. I love the issue of emotional intelligence, particularly among the healthcare workers, where there is always dynamic situations that take you from one type of emotion to another. With one patient that comes in and the next patient, you have to be somebody different altogether. But at the level of the relationship now between a supervisor and a supervisee, how do you, as a supervisee, realizing that your supervisor is the one that's creating a toxic situation? How do you advise? How do you try to change that situation? Not only for you, but for the productivity that's expected, but also for the supervisor himself or herself, or even the other people that are under the same hand that is causing toxic situation. I'm just worried about that. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I'll give a quick reply to that. So I think one of the challenges is I find that when one has discussions as a department and you teach this stuff and everybody understands about dragons and we become gracious. So instead of become nasty and saying, oh, that guy is so, such a dick or such a this or such a that, it's being able to understand, okay, they're stressed and their dragons are just off the charts. That already helps to change the conversation. So sometimes just working with a group and everybody starts understanding dragons and working with dragons, you can get very far. But I have found there are always people who, because of also trauma and their own stories, are stuck in survival mode. And sometimes they're quite high up the hierarchy. And we sometimes have to deal with it when you're just trying to refer your patient to somebody else and you're dealing with somebody who's very difficult. And the reality is, it's a bit like Trump. There are some people who are so within that space, you cannot reason with it. It's an irrational space, the dragon space. And it's all about power and all about, it's almost impossible to reason somebody out of that. So the thing we have looked at with my interns is trying to immunize them. If you start understanding that somebody in dragon mode is not personal and it's their stuff, more about how we protect those, our young people, against people in the department that we might not be able to change. So I think partly is it, how do we give everybody the skills and the knowledge, so we, because it just boycotts ourselves when we're horrible, aren't we? But also, how do we also create strong enough spaces that if there are people who are struggling so much in their own lives that they can bring their best selves to work, how do we still manage to create an environment around that? And I have seen us being able to do that when needed. So, but that's not an easy question. I think as a world, as a global society, and at the moment, there's a lot of credence being given to people to just let their dragons rip. We are seeing it causing havoc in the world at the moment. So yeah, so that's learn to manage your supervisor. But a lot of it is also, as soon as you can manage your own dragons, you have a much better chance already about trying to actually deal with somebody else if they're in dragon mode. So very good question. Thank you. Ilse, I'm going to hand back to you. I'm sorry, we are getting into your discussion time.
Dr. Madeleine, a big thank you from our side. Yes, it's a wonderful team that we're working with here in the Eastern Cape. Dr. Madeleine, big thank you. And we're going to talk about the trainer course, and we will let our colleagues know if any of them are interested. From myself and from Rian, just very briefly, I'm going to just share my screen again. We want to give you a sneak preview.
Very, very light blue. That means that's...
There's somebody, please just mute yourself. Colleagues, can you see my screen? Sorry, Eastern Cape webinar number 2. Can you see it?
Yes, somebody there.
Okay, so our next webinar is planned for the 21st of May, also Wednesday evening, 6:30. And it is still under construction, but we're going to tackle a very interesting topic, work integrated learning, service learning. In the clinical professions, we're going to unpack that a little bit. And then I'm handing over to Rian van der Venter, to my colleague, to quickly tell us what is going to happen in webinar 3 and 4. And then I'm going to have the last word, and then we're going to close. Rian, over to you.
Hello everyone. So in webinar 3 in June, it will be a Tuesday evening. So we're deviating a little bit from the usual Wednesdays because that's the only time the speaker was available. The speaker has participated last year in our AI webinar, and this particular speaker has a passion for AI and technological aspects in education. So he's going to help us write effective prompts when we use generative AI tools, so that we can get the most out of an AI tool in an ethical manner. So that's what we are doing in that one. And that webinar will be 1 hour long. Prof, you can move to the next one. And then webinar 4 in November will be a few speakers, will also be about 1 hour long, and we will focus on gender and sexual minorities in that particular webinar, talking about how we could create inclusive and affirming environments and provide care for that community of patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rian. And colleagues, with that, we're going to end this webinar then tonight. We're a little bit over time. Thank you to all of you who have attended. And Dr. Madeleine, a big thank you again from us. This must have a follow-up. This must lead to something more. We need you to train us in these skills. We need it. In her absence, I also just want to say a big thank you to Prof. Elise Archer, who joined us earlier this evening and who spoke to us, also for her inspiring message. Colleagues, with that, then I want to end this by saying there's no letter I in the word team. So although Elise mentioned Ilse a lot, it is not Ilse doing this. It is this amazing team in the Eastern Cape that are putting this together. And I'm just the fortunate one to be able to talk to you tonight and for the moment to be the leader of this team. So to all of you who have attended tonight, please join us in our future webinars. Come to the conference if you can, become actively involved in SAAHE. Let us build SAAHE to become stronger because we're in this together. Thank you, colleagues. All the best and have a good evening. Thank you and bye-bye.